Russia, May 15th, 1976. You will see and hear for the first time the plight of our Jewish people who wish to leave and live in a free society.
A state that was ruled by fear.
The Soviet Union wasn't a new totalitarian regime by any means.
It was like a giant prison. The security apparatus, the KGB, perhaps as much as 10 or 20 million people were involved in keeping state security.
In a situation of totalitarian rule, of tremendous severity, a small group of people challenged it. And didn't challenge it for a day or overnight or for a week, but challenged it on and on and on, week by week, month by month, year by year.
My name is Refusenik from Minsk.
My name is Vitaly Rubin.
My name is Dina Bialin.
And his name?
And my Yosef Bialin.
For 4 months, my wife was subject to the interrogations in the KGB in connection with political espionage.
My name is Anatoly Sharansky.
My name is Aida Nudri. Sorry, I don't know English.
Okay, I'll help you.
Наиболее тяжелыми в эмоциональном плане били на улицах города.
Was beaten in the streets of the cities.
Намеревались посадить в сумасшедший дом.
And even intended to put me into the psychiatric hospital.
My name is Alexander Lerner.
My name is Vladimir Slipak. I was 5 times in prison. My older son, Alexander, was 4 times in prison. Our situation is as bad as for every refusing here.
We think it is very important to ask the Voice of America, or perhaps from the BBC, to say something about the people who are in very great danger.
The Jews of Russia had always been the largest single mass of Jewish people in the world. Under the Tsars, who ruled Russia until the revolution in 1917, anti-Jewish laws were frequent. The most serious being the confining of Jews to particular parts of Russia, and the refusal to allow Jews to really be an integral part of the society. Initially, the revolution brought liberation to the Jews, but as Soviet communism began to impose itself in the early 1920s, the Jews found themselves discriminated against, and Jewish activity was strictly circumscribed by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Every type of independent cultural movement, independent religious movement in the Soviet Union was grossly suppressed, so that by 1930 there was no real Jewish life at all, and emigration was an impossibility. The Jews could see no way out. They were trapped.
Знаменование победоносного завершения Великой Отечественной войны установить, что 9 мая является днем всенародного торжества.
Stalin was only one leader of the great powers who won Second World War who really supported creation of Israel. He illegally sold them old British planes. In the first anti-Israel war, Jews used these 8 planes. It was shock for the Arab forces because they didn't know from where these planes came, and they stopped the offensive. But then Israel decided it will be not pro-Stalin, they turned more to United States, and Stalin started to treat Jews as the enemies of the people.
На улице мне очень понятно объяснили, какой я национальности. Встретила меня ватага детей, и они просто вручную мне очень на понятном языке объяснили, что такое евреи, как с евреями надо обращаться.
Я чувствовал, что невозможно просто сидеть и ждать, когда придут и начнут тебя бить. Мы решили организовать что-то вроде бригад самообороны. Поскольку мы были в меньшинстве, это кончилось достаточно печально для нас. Меня и одного моего друга поймали после занятий и избили до потери сознания и даже закопали. Но мы выбрались из этой импровизированной могилы, ограничились тем, что пошли в милицию. Ну, там офицер выслушал нас и сказал: ну-ка, давайте убирайтесь отсюда, жиденята, пока я вас не посадил.
Университет составит 3 факультетов.
Я закончил школу с золотой медалью. Это означало, что я получил высшие оценки по всем предметам. И это, согласно законам того времени, давало мне право поступления в любой институт или университет без экзаменов по моему выбору. Тем не менее, я не смог поступить по своему выбору. Там мне ясно говорили, что, конечно, если ты настаиваешь, парень, то мы возьмем твои документы.
И я была очень уверена, что я поступила, потому что не было ни у кого таких оценок, и у меня было отлично все. И когда я пришла смотреть списки, меня в списках студентов не оказалось. Вот это первый раз, когда очень больно я столкнулась с антисемитизмом.
I didn't know about my background, and I just learned that it's something very, very bad to be Jewish. And my parents even concealed that from me till age of 5 or 6, because they didn't want me to experience the trauma. One day I behaved not properly. I said some sort of a curse, which included the idea of Jewishness, just as a normal curse. And that forced them to disclose the secret. And I do recall that it was a very hard feeling, really traumatic feeling, because being Jewish is meaning cursed or corrupt or having something intrinsically wrong in your soul.
It came as a wave, 1948 through 1953, call these years black years for Soviet Jewry. It started with the murder of the famous actor and Jewish public figure Solomon Michals.
Writers, poets, playwrights who wrote in Yiddish mainly, but who were read widely, these people were gradually being arrested. And in August 1952, they were taken into police headquarters, and they were questioned and summarily tried and shot. And then the newspapers came out with an announcement that a number of doctors, doctor killers, killers in white coats, had been arrested. They were Kremlin doctors. And their names were given, and their names were by and large Jewish names.
Я уже окончала институт, и, боже мой, что творилось в институте? Каждый день в актовый, большой актовый зал нас всех сгоняли, и начиналось еврейский заговор, повис над Россией. Это евреи, они отравители, вот, враги в белых халатах.
And she says, what happened in the hospitals? The professors who taught us, they are announced that they are traitors, enemies. They were arrested. Some of them disappeared. I know them very well. They cannot be traitors.
Репрессии Сталина достигли такого масштаба, что мы ожидали, что нас могут просто выселить из Москвы и могут с нами повторить то, что сделал Гитлер со своими евреями.
Как-то ночью я подслушал разговор отца и матери. И они обсуждали, что будет, если нас начнут выселять. Все уже почти открыто говорили, что скоро евреи будут выселять в лагеря. И родители понимали, что это означает смерть. Так вот, они обсуждали, стоит ли покончить жизнь самоубийством, когда за нами придут.
Of course, we asked my father. He had high positions. And he believed to all this, what the Bolsheviks told. It became his religion. And my father said, among Jews, there are so many traitors and enemies. And better to arrest 100 people, among them one enemy, than to let this enemy free. I just told him, I'll never be in your party. Before this, he told me that I must join the Communist Party and so on. I said, I'll never be in your party. It's too much blood on your hands.
Stalin died, and my father explained to me that that's a great day for us, for Jews, because probably we are saved from very bad things. And so I should remember it all my life. But he said, don't say it to anybody, do what everybody does. And I was crying together with everybody about death of a great leader. And I knew that as a Jew, I have to be happy that he died.
Я жил в Москве, большой, культурный, столичный город с огромными, прекрасными библиотеками. Я еврей, хочу прочесть о еврейском народе, о том, что происходило с нами, о моей культуре. Я отправился в библиотеку Ленина. Я пытался найти в каталогах, я пытался найти где-то в книжных магазинах. Нигде не было ничего. Не было никакой еврейской литературы. Он предложил мне учить меня хибру, то есть ивриту. Я помню, тогда даже еще не знал, что такое иврит. Я стал мне расспрашивать, что это за язык. Он мне говорит, это язык государства Израиль. Но для меня тогда государство Израиль это было все равно, что иная планета.
Мне один мой приятель предложил книжку почитать. Книга эта неофициальная. Но эта книга не книга была, это было напечатано на машинке. Много страниц. И притом это была не первая копия. Очень плохо было читать. Вот столько страниц. Мне дали только на один день эту книгу, на один день.
Это я помню, мы читали, по-моему, 18-20 часов подряд, всю ночь я не спала. И поэтому я всю ночь я не спала и пошла так вот на работу. И это были действительно, да, это был важный момент, эксодус.
И я должен сказать, что утром мы проснулись, мы были совсем другими людьми, совсем другими.
The whole project of the involvement of the Israelis was a Mossad operation.
A team was established by Ben-Gurion in the Prime Minister's office in 1955-56 in order to start the struggle for Russian Jews.
ישבתי אצל בן גוריון 3 שעות, ואני אמרתי לו, תשמע, צריכים לשלוח צעירים שהם יחפשו את היהודים ויתחילו ליצור קשר איתם. אז תהיה עלייה.
Israel was at that time about 1/3 of the population of Moscow. How are you going to make the Soviet Union change its policy because you put pressure on them? Who are you after all?
אני התהלכתי בשנים ראשונות, הייתה לי הרגשה שזה מין דון קישוט. הברחנו כסף, הברחנו חומר הסברה, שלחנו שליחים.
I served in the Israeli embassy in Moscow for 3 years, and I had a double role. I was a diplomat, but I was also sent at the same time. I was sent by the Mossad, which had a branch called Nativ. And our role was to contact as many Jews as we can and give them printed matters about Israel, about Zionism, about Jewry. So we carried the prayer book, Siddur. That's a calendar full of facts and figures about Israel and the Jewish life. So you encounter somebody, when you shake his hand, you say Shalom, and then he has it.
Я начал учить язык сначала просто из такого простого любопытства, но постепенно я настолько увлекся этим, это мне показалось настолько увлекательным и интересным, такого передо мной начал открываться постепенно запретный мир еврейских знаний.
Called a meeting of students from all over New York where I set up the student struggle for Soviet Jewry. The kids wanted action, so I said, do you think we can get some kids, enough kids together, you know, and so on. Oh, yeah.
I was a political science major at Queens College. Those of us involved in the civil rights movement had some knowledge of demonstrations, and we simply decided we'd go out. We said, well, if Soviet Jews have been forced into silence, then we should be silent. So on May 1st, 1964, we had a 4-hour march. Students just came out of the woodwork. We marched in silence, but I tell you, that was the last time we were quiet.
There's a fire burning brightly in the sky, and the roar of thunder crashing.
Glenn Richter shows up in Borough Park one day, and there's my opportunity to fight the war for the salvation of Eastern European Jewry, and I immediately signed up. He made me the 6th grade chairman of the student struggle. That was the moment that changed my childhood. My father was a survivor, and Glenn Richter showing up with his Soviet Jewry pamphlets warning about spiritual genocide was exactly what I had been waiting for, because that gave me the chance to retroactively fight the Holocaust.
In 1966, Elie Wiesel went to the Soviet Union and wrote this incredible, conscience-shattering book, The Jews of Silence.
The Nativ, in Meirozan especially, they asked me to go. When I heard that Jews were suffering in the Soviet Union, it was inconceivable for me not to go. When I came to a synagogue on Simchat Torah, thousands and thousands of young boys and girls came from all over Moscow to dance in the street and to sing Hebrew songs and to literally to declare, to affirm, to celebrate their Jewishness. There was beauty there, great beauty to see these young people who risked their security, their freedom, their positions, and show that they were Jewish. At that time, there wasn't a speech I gave, a lesson I gave, without somehow mentioning Soviet Jewry.
And at the very end of the book, he says, what bothers me most is not the silence of Soviet Jews, on which silence has been imposed, but the silence of the Jews among whom I live today.
The Jewish leadership in America didn't want to hear the story. Those who changed the situation were the young people, the high school students. I remember I would go to these gatherings of young kids. The parents would bring them in their cars and go away.
To teach their children their heritage, to teach their children Hebrew, Yiddish,
Jewish history, literature, all the things which we take for granted in a free society, these things are absolutely and completely forbidden in the Soviet Union.
Yaakov believed that we were living in a time when oppressed peoples all around the world were rising up.
There has not been in the last 20 years a single protest where Negroes had their backs to the wall that our Jewish brothers did not come to our assistance. We must not be silent. We must continue to speak out until every vestige of mistreatment to the Jews in the Soviet Union is destroyed.
We used elemental biblical imagery in our messages. Moses appearing in front of Pharaoh with a simple declaration, "Let my people go." And we saw ourselves as making the same demand. We would compare the Soviets with Pharaoh.
Let my people go.
The tension in the Middle East over the Gulf of Aqaba blockade develops into full-scale war, with reports of heavy fighting between Israeli and Egyptian forces along the Gaza Strip and the Sinai border.
The frightening description on Soviet radio, as indeed on British and American radio, that the Arab states had attacked Israel and Israel was about to be destroyed, was the ultimate depression, the ultimate end for Soviet Jews.
In the first 5 days, the information we got on the official Russian radio, it was an official Arab information about the victory of Arab troops and so on and so on and so on. And suddenly,
the miracle happened.
When that destruction of Israel within 6 days turned to be not only not true, but to be an incredible victory for the Jewish state.
Открыло нам глаза на то, что такое еврейское государство, о котором мы слышали только очень что-то плохое, очень такое недостойное, очень отрицательное. Мы поняли, что это страна, которая может за себя постоять.
And that really created the renaissance of hope, that there was something to which Jews could cling.
Suddenly you find out that when Israel is struggling for its right to exist, it's also struggling for your personal pride, for your dignity.
First of all, I was all of a sudden really proud that they have won, that Jews have won the war. And second, I understood that the Soviet Union is working against the interest of my people, of Jewish people. I didn't understand what Jewish people means, what stays behind it. I knew that I am Jew, but what are my people?
And then you suddenly realize that you are connected to Israel, even if you know practically nothing about this country. And then we wanted to understand what this mystical connection with Israel means. And that's when we realized that there is different history and different people and different country to which we belong. And that's when we started seriously thinking to live for Israel.
Мы умудрялись где-нибудь забраться подальше в лес, где меньше влияния было этих глушилок, и там слушали эти передачи. У нас появилась группа, которая решила подать документы с просьбой предоставить нам выездные визы в Израиль.
When the day comes and you have enough strength to say publicly to the authorities that you don't want to live here, you want to leave, that's the day when you suddenly feel yourself free. And no doubt that that is a turning point in your life when you're turning from the Soviet slave into free person, and from frightened Jew who is trying to escape his Jewishness, his identity, to proud Jew.
I and my family asked for permission to leave in 68, 69, 70. No answer at all. No explanation. It is refused, and that's all. Why? No explanation. Don't ask us.
They started writing letters to the West, and the theme was, why have you forgotten us?
And that struck a deep chord within me when I first saw the "Why Have You Forgotten Us?" Because I knew darn well that while I was in a concentration camp and others like me, the world had forgotten us. The world didn't care, the world didn't do anything for us.
And the challenge was to sort of help wake up the Jewish community.
We tried to move the established Jewish community, tried to shame them, tried to cajole them into doing what should be done.
The Jewish leadership believes in silent diplomacy. Don't make waves. Don't come out with huge rallies. It can only anger the Russians. Main thing, they said, it may even endanger the Soviet Union.
We finally gave up, and we created our own effort and our own movement.
In the Soviet Union,
by refusing to allow basic human rights,
a cry will be heard.
and from this they will take heart.
Soviet Union is a racist society which holds in captivity its 3.5 million Jewish citizens who are not permitted to leave.
Because I am a Holocaust survivor, I suppose subconsciously I must have always felt somewhat guilty for having survived. I felt that I had to repay the debt, that I survived for a reason. I didn't want to have written on my gravestone, "Here lies Cy Frumkin. He sold 1 million yards of drapery fabrics."
We urge the Southern California community to flood the Soviet Union with Passover greeting cards to Soviet synagogues.
My parents came from the Soviet Union, actually from Ukraine. I had two aunts, my dad's two sisters, in the USSR, and they're the only aunts and the only living grandparent I had. I met Cy at a Federation meeting, and of all the people who were at the meeting, there were two people who were frustrated at the pace, Cy Frumkin and me. I told him that we had formed this organization, and he said, "Well, do you have a letterhead?" I said, "Well, no, you got to get a letterhead. And I said, "Well, how do you do that?" And he says, "Oh, you go to Postal Instant Press. They'll mock it up for you, and they'll print off 500 of them, and then you have a stationery, and then you're official." I didn't know any of this, but Cy was in the drapery business. He was very well organized.
We were total amateurs. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. There was a very prominent television personality in town at that time by the name of George Putnam.
More trouble to report at Isla Vista, an explosion late last night.
Zev called up George Putnam and pretended to be a professor and said, "One of my students just came back from the Soviet Union. He has an interesting story to tell. Would you like to talk to him, Mr. Putnam?" And Mr. Putnam said, "Yeah, I would love to." So then Zev said, my name is Zev Yaroslavsky. I thought, we told him what was happening. We told him about it. And he said, "Oh, those unfortunate Soviet Jews."
And George said, "Why don't we do a candlelight march downtown? We could have thousands of people with candles." And I said, "George, we can't get 200 people to a demonstration."
And George said, "Don't be ridiculous. What are you talking about? We'll have it at City Hall. We'll march from Music Center. We'll invite the governor. We'll invite the congressman. We'll have the media."
December 22nd at 6:30 p.m., that'll be next Tuesday, the Candlelight Walk for Soviet Jews will be held in downtown Los Angeles. The theme, Let the Jews Go.
We showed up there that December night, the first night of Hanukkah, and Cy and I didn't know what the heck we were going to have. It was an unbelievable sight. We had 5,000 people or more.
It's important to understand that during those years there was no diplomatic connection between Israel and Soviet, so nobody with Israeli passport could go to Russia.
Students, especially from Western countries, from Harvard or from UCLA or from Paris or from the Sorbonne, were organized to go inside the Soviet Union, and they were instructed by us what to do, whom to meet.
I was slated to go with a friend of mine to Leningrad for Pesach. We both had Scandinavian passports. It was an old apartment in central Leningrad, and there were lots of young people. Coming in there, it was like I'd forgotten the place they were living. There was no secret talks, there were no carefulness, there were no hints. They were singing Hebrew songs, they were talking about going to Israel. I was the one leading the Seder, reading the whole Haggadah. And when we came to Shana Haba Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem, it even moves me today, because it was very moving, the way this was a kind of completely unreal reality for them. I mean, it was like they, in a way, they were living as far from the possibility of next year in Jerusalem as possible. And later on, Hillel Butman told me that the Seder completely made him be sure that I was not a KGB agent, because he said the KGB won't drag on a Seder for 2.5 hours. So at a certain point, Hillel and Zev asked me to come walking with them, and we went out in the park. And when I was told about the plan for the first time, my reaction was horror, that for God's sake, they must not try even to do something like that.
In 1970, I, together with a group of Jewish Zionist activists, tried to escape to Israel.
אני הייתי יוזם של המבצע הזה, שאני נתתי לה שם חתונה.
It was a group of desperate people who decided to do something dramatic in order to change their life.
My secretary told me that there is some people in Leningrad, Mark Dimshit and Hillel Butman, who will organize a group that will try to hijack a Russian airplane.
העיקר שיהיה רעש, והרעש בעקבות הרעש הזה, הממשלה תתחיל להוציא יהודים, לתת להם רישיונות לעלות ארצה.
We especially stressed in our statement that we are not going to shed any blood. It's a very small plan. Only 12 places there.
אנחנו קונים את הכרטיסים לטיסה הזאת, כל הנוסעים שלנו שהם מוכנים לסכן חייהם כדי לברוח לישראל.
לא היה מה לעשות, רק משהו לגמרי מטורף, לגמרי, אפילו ללא תקווה.
Dimshit and Kuznetsov found that there is a flight that will bring us close to Finnish border, and then on the ground we would simply drag the pilots out and leave them alive in the forest, and then Dimshit would take off like on a high of 25 meters to prevent ourselves from being detected by air forces. And the day came.
When we were approached to the airport
at 8:30 in the morning, June 15, Smolensk airport, close to Leningrad.
We saw a couple of the KGB people and the soldiers. They saw that we saw them. We played the game as if we didn't see them.
לא יכולנו לחזור בחזרה לחיים שכבר לא היה להם משמעות מבחינתנו. אנחנו רצינו ללכת למרות הכל, למרות ההיגיון, כאילו היינו אומרים שאנחנו לא נחזור, רק בכוח אפשר לעצור אותנו, אבל אנחנו בדרך לארץ ישראל.
And I saw that my friends are battling with soldiers. The soldiers arrest them, and there are dogs. There are some hundreds of soldiers. And the moment I saw it, I got myself a blow, I fall, and they put me in a car and sent to the prison. And I asked myself, you admit that it was a mistake? Now you are a prisoner. Everything is lost. It was a stupid thing to do. And then I answered to myself, no, it was a true thing to do. For I love Israel. And if you love something, if you are not ready to sacrifice for your love, you are a liar. You don't love it. Now I know that I love Israel indeed, for I was ready to sacrifice my life. So I am quiet with myself. But you know, it takes only half an hour to feel good like that. And then when pushed in a cell, I looked around. Nobody here, nobody comes up. It is silent. You feel yourself like in a grave.
I was also arrested and sentenced to death.
Emergency session of the Israeli parliament today, Prime Minister Golda Meir, dressed in mourning, appealed for world intervention to save the lives of 2 Russian Jews sentenced to death for trying to hijack a plane out of Soviet Russia.
Human life, the rights of man, the honor of man, justice. We learned what these concepts mean to the Soviet Union.
9 more Jews will go on trial in Russia early next month in connection with the airplane hijack case.
World opinion was outraged that these death sentences should be imposed, and this became an international scandal.
Trials really produced among young Jews over here a sense that these Soviet Jews were really in total, utter desperation to get out, to the extent that they would try to take a plane and get out.
That was the moment when a combination of Soviet Jewish desperation and the rage of the activists combined to shame the Jewish establishment into finally placing this cause close to the top of its agenda.
We realized that Soviet Jews were ready to risk their lives for the cause.
You could combine the activism and the energy of the young people and of the activists with the experience and resources of the establishment, that is the way that you make a difference. Each one alone couldn't do it.
Under the pressure of the Jewish community, Soviet canceled the death penalties, but still the main achievement was not our private personal destiny, but the fact that from this moment, Jewish community worldwide started struggling for Soviet Jewry.
When they commuted the death sentences, it was a victory. This is the Soviet Union, the other superpower. They don't respond to public opinion. They're a dictatorship. And here they caved. And after the Leningrad hijacking trials, 10 or 12,000 Jews came out a year or 18 months later.
התחילה עלייה. אני הייתי מרוצה ממה שאני עשיתי, שיש כבר תוצאות. יהודים טסים.
Jews in the Soviet Union had their national consciousness reawakened, and thousands, tens of thousands of Jews began to apply to leave the country.
Now all of a sudden you have people inside of the Soviet Union who look at the KGB and say, I'm not scared of you anymore. All of a sudden there's that little chink in the glass, that little mark, and all of a sudden that break starts spreading.
После Ленинградского процесса я решился подать документы на выезд в Израиль. Я уже больше не мог жить такой двуличной жизнью.
Jews in the Soviet Union who applied to emigrate were refused. They simply were refused. The Soviet Union just didn't let them go. So they called themselves Refuseniks, откazniks.
Власти делали такую двойную игру. С одной стороны, они арестовывали, в то же время стали выпускать людей, показывая, что преступников они арестовывают, но вообще они дают евреям уехать, так сказать. Такая была политика властей.
Once a person became a refusenik, you didn't know what was going to happen to you. Because once you asked, it became public knowledge that you'd requested an exit visa. You had to get permission from the people who ran your apartment complex. You had to go and ask your boss to sign an okay. It was no secret. Everybody knew. You'd lost your job, but you had to work. There wasn't any such thing as unemployment in the Soviet Union. So you entered some sort of limbo.
А когда мы потребовали объяснения, нам сказали, нам невыгодно поставлять квалифицированные рабочие кадры, квалифицированную рабочую силу. И начались эти страшные годы отказа, потому что мы с работы были серийно уволены в тот же день, как мы подали документы на выезд в Израиль.
Я же был научный сотрудник. Когда я подал документы на выезд в Израиль, эту работу я потерял, и меня больше ни на какую работу не принимали.
А дальше каждый искал какой-то источник существования. Модно стало, например, работать в лифте.
Я работаю сам лифтером в больнице. Наверх я возил людей после сердечного приступа с инфарктом, а вниз на лифте я возил трупы после смерти.
Но в этих лифтовых конторах, когда уже отказников собралось достаточно много, тоже уже не было места. И когда моя жена, например, хотела устроиться, то ей сказали, а у тебя есть кандидатская диссертация? Потому что там все работали от кандидата и выше.
Before applying, I was the head of laboratory in the Research Institute of Television. I was refused because of, as they told me, state secrets.
My wife and I, we were denied because of the reason that I am an important specialist, which is certainly nonsense.
After a year being in refusal, I spoke with a general in the head office of KGB, and during this conversation he told me something about my secrecy. And I asked him, what secrecy are you speaking about? In that field of technology where I worked, we are behind the level of United States and the Western country for about 12 or 14 years. And he said, oh, this is the main secret.
The main secret being that the fact that they were so far behind that you...
Yes, and I said, every boy in the West knows about this. He told me, you know it better.
I knew some Russian and I thought I could speak it reasonably well. The first phone call, I would say, I'm calling from London.
Хорошо, хорошо. Но у вас что слышно? Как дети?
And I understand that you've been refused permission to emigrate. After a while, I was making 4, 5, 6 telephone calls in one evening and phoning every evening.
The Israeli consul came to see me in Toronto. He says, we are looking for people to make telephone calls to the Refuseniks. It was a difficult job because the Soviets interrupted you.
Не всегда было просто позвониться до нас. Советские средства коммуникаций, в частности, советские телефонные линии, контролировались КГБ так же, как все остальное. Голые среди волков. У нас не было никакого оружия обороны. Что тебя защищает? Ничто. Тебя может защитить только общественное мнение.
I asked them, what is the most important thing that we can do for you? And they said, publicize our names, get us into the press.
The information I gained by this time, I was always passing to the United States. And we built up a very good chain of communication.
I was on a weekly call with Michael Sherborne in London. He was on a weekly call with, at times, Sharansky and with others. And we were collecting information, and as soon as we would collect it, we would disperse it.
And so the word would spread very quickly across the United States to all the cities where we had activists working.
Lou Rosenboom in Ohio knew somebody in California. The people in California knew somebody in New York.
There would be a housewife here, there would be a physicist there would be a student here, there would be an 87-year-old grandmother there. These were the most amazing group of people I've ever met in my life.
The place in front of synagogue in Moscow became like an official club for those Jews who are thinking to leave the Soviet Union. I also started going there. In the beginning, very cautiously, understanding that everything is seen and watched by KGB. But then, with the time, understanding more and more that I have to cross this line, I have nothing to lose.
It was the first time in my life, and for many people too, when we sensed what Jewish community means.
That kind of feeling of community that existed there was really enormous, and was such a strong factor of survival, you cannot imagine.
ואז באתי באותו יום, זה היה שבת, וראיתי המונים של הצעירים עומדים ברחוב, וזה היה יום נורא, וזה היה יורד שלג כזה רטוף, והוא מיד נמס, ואפור כזה, וקור, ובוץ מתחת לרגליים, ואף על פי זה עומדים צעירים שם, ומחייכים. כשראיתי כל כך הרבה פנים צעירים שם, חשבתי, ככה בטח נראים יהודים בישראל.
She came to synagogue. I think it was what can be called the love at first glance, at least from me.
הוא אמר, אני כבר יודע 1,000 מילים. אז הרגשתי שאני כל כך רוצה להיות כמוהו, גם כן שאני רוצה ללמוד עברית, אז אמרתי שגם אני יודעת 1,000 מילים, אבל לא ידעתי בעצם שום דבר. ואז הוא הזמין אותי ללמוד איתו, ומאוד רציתי את זה. אבל מהר מאוד הבינו שאני לא יודעת כלום, וזה היה נתן.
Под Москвой, во Вражках, собирались отказники со всего Союза. Собирались в лесу, просто чтобы встретиться, поговорить. И вот сейчас эта традиция возобновлена.
В лесу устраивались конкурсы еврейской песни, в которых принимало много народу. Было жюри, которое решало, кто занимал первое место.
I wanted to go and see some of these people who were merely voices to me over a telephone. I arranged with a travel agent in New York to book us on a regular tourist tour because we didn't want to stand out. We wanted to look like a tourist.
There were about 30 or 40 people on this tour, middle-aged couples, and then these 4 guys, as though we weren't going to stick out like a sore thumb.
They could get on a plane, they could buy their ticket, they could sign up for one of these in-tourists, 1 week in Moscow, 1 week in Leningrad, 10 days in the Soviet Union, and slip away from the guide, slip away from the hotel, give up the free breakfast, which was part of the package tour, and go instead to visit a family whose address they had.
It's hard to believe that you could live someplace, want to go even on a trip, and you can't get out of the country, or you'd be dismissed from your job. It just made me want to go and check it out.
Our first encounter with Refuseniks was at the synagogue on Arkhipova Street in Moscow, and that's when we met Yulia Kosharovsky.
To see a person from behind the Iron Curtain was like to see a person from another planet. I talked to them several words in English, but they understood me, which was a great surprise that people
from a completely different country can understand what I'm saying.
We felt this enormous bond, and we did feel that they also became part of our families, and that's why we felt this enormous responsibility for them.
When I first saw American tourists who were coming especially to meet with us, I was very moved and excited. Simple Jews who were living their private lives, and suddenly they got up and came here as soldiers of our army, which is struggling for our release. And we were becoming partners, comrades in arms.
You ready, Zev? You want me to give you a sound cue? Okay, Professor Lerner, it's very good to be with you in Moscow. Do you have anything that you feel would be valuable to tell to the Jewish community in the United States?
Oh, yes, definitely. I'm out of film.
You're out of film?
Yes.
How do you like that? You'll never go in Hollywood.
Well, you spent too much time answering the question. I'd never taken motion picture film in my life. I brought a Bell & Howell 16mm camera to chronicle and document our trip. And it was a culminating point for all of us to meet the people who we had invested so much of our energies on behalf of. And for them, you only have to look at their faces. I mean, every leader of the Moscow Refusenik community was in that apartment at one point or another that afternoon.
Yes.
Each activist, depending on his status with the KGB, would have anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 KGB people who tailed them all the time.
I panned the camera from the balcony where we were talking to some of the Refuseniks, and out in the middle of nowhere, in this big field, acres and acres of emptiness, is this one car with 4 guys in it, KGB guys, just stationed. From the other side, there was a guy standing right at the front door, and then Polsky left our little convocation early. Watch me, he said, because I'm going to be followed when I get on the bus. So I watched for him as he went out to the bus stop when he got on the bus, and then watched as a car almost ran over a couple of people to make sure they didn't lose the trolley bus that Polsky was on.
When a tourist went to the Soviet Union, they came to some of the councils, to Chicago Action, to Bay Area, to Long Island, and they received a briefing. The briefers taught them how to code names into their personal checkbooks, because any tourist that would go through customs in Russia had to be absolutely clean if they were strip searched. You couldn't find on our tourist one piece of written information indicating that they were going to see a Jew.
If you watch an old James Bond movie, you have a great feeling as to what it felt like for us. It was Christmas Eve, and I had agreed to stop off for a couple of days in Moscow to meet these families and to deliver some messages and deliver some Jewish items. So when we finally got to the apartment and saw all kinds of Soviet police cars in front of the apartment, I was extraordinarily reluctant to go any further. And we walked away. And my friend, he convinced me, let's go back once more, we've come so far.
Maury and I met with some Refuseniks one evening in Slepak's house. And then we said, we'll meet you the next evening. Now, Slepak and his friends whipped out these magic slates. Remember the old magic slates where you wrote on it and you pulled up this plastic cover and it was just wax, and all of a sudden the writing disappeared. So Slepak and some of the others were pointing to the bugs in the ceiling. So we said, meet you at 10 o'clock at night. And then we wrote on the magic slate, 8 p.m. So the next night, Maury and I come, and there are cars of the KGB all lined up. So we zipped out of the courtyard. We came back in the middle of the night, knock on the door, tentatively. And Slepak is there, is this huge monster dog, Akhbar. And Akhbar used to love biting the KGB. So Slepak said, where were you? And Maury and I said, well, we came at 8 o'clock. The KGB was downstairs. We thought they would come up and, get you. Slepak looked at us right in the eye and he said, we're not afraid. Why should you be?
There was a constant stream of visitors going in to take things in and to make contact and to bring things out. To bring out messages, to bring out reports, to bring out appeals.
We
с Машей посылали списки тех, кто подал документы на выезд. Мы сначала это дело печатали на пишущей машинке. После этого я фотографировал эти страницы, проявлял пленку, и уже проявленную пленку я скатывал в тугой рулончик. После этого мы покупали в сувенирах какую-нибудь статуэтку деревянную, туда засовывал этот рулончик, потом приклеивал голову обратно. И мы дарили эти сувениры. И их везли за границу.
About 14 of the Refuseniks came to my hotel room. Sharansky took my tape recorder into the bathroom and made a tape that became very well known. It's called the bathroom tape.
To all our Jewish brothers and sisters in America, we hope that the day will come when all of us will be able to meet in Jerusalem. Bashana Hazot V'Yerushalayim. Shalom Lehitraot.
The KGB, the security services of the Soviet Union, the border police were very vigilant.
At the airport, I just took the tapes and put them under my blouse and down through some of my clothes. And they said, give us your purse. And I said, no, I don't have to give you my purse. I'd held the plane up for 25 minutes. And everybody, when I got on the plane, clapped. And I had the tapes that I'd put underneath in my blouse.
Valery Panoff, the great ballet dancer for the Kirov Ballet, and his wife Galina, also the Kirov Ballet, applied to emigrate to Israel. They were fired from the Kirov Ballet. In the prime of his life, this prima ballerino was put out to pasture and atrophied as a dancer, never was able to come back again.
All my best friends who was close to me say most terrible things about me. And for Galina, why you go away with this bloody Jewish guy? You Russian, good girl. What are you doing with this bloody Jew?
We got to Valerie and Galina's apartment. We went in there. It was amazing. They had set up a little practice studio for themselves, and they wanted to keep the muscles.
This is exercise every day with Galina. Of course, you only cry to see like you slowly, your body die.
When you're a ballerina or a ballerino, like a ball player, you've got so many years, and then it's something else. Then you become a ballet instructor or a choreographer.
Valery told us that he had been threatened several times by the KGB that they were going to take care of him.
They arrested him for some kind of an infraction, and in prison they showed him a bunch of people with broken legs, so it was a hint.
And every day behind my shoulder, and all the time say, hey, if you run away, I will kill you.
Valery's 35th birthday was observed at a demonstration in New York. The Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith and the National Conference on Soviet Jewry have been working to get the Panoffs out.
We had to get to the United States government. That was the only entity powerful enough to persuade the Soviet Union to change its policies.
Been asked to do anything on behalf of Russian dancer Valery Panoff?
The United States has always discussed both the various categories of problems and individual cases on a private basis and has not made public what representations it has made.
It's been a year now since I spoke to Secretary Kissinger and to President Nixon in behalf of Valery Panoff. I was assured that everything would be done. And here, a year later, Valery Panoff and his wife are denied.
The idea that a state could prevent citizens from leaving was anathema to Senator Jackson, because he had gone as a young congressman to Europe in the closing days of World War II, and he had been present at the liberation of Buchenwald.
And that had made an indelible impression on him. It affected him for the rest of his life. He saw an opportunity to help rescue people who had been mass murdered under the Nazis.
Mr. Brezhnev said there were only a few Jews that were stirring up trouble. What's he afraid of? Why doesn't he let them go? Doesn't he represent a big and powerful nation?
The Nixon administration had concluded a trade agreement with the Kremlin and was about to send it to the Senate for ratification. So we seized on that as something that could be effectively blocked. And the idea began to take shape of tying approval of that trade agreement to a change in Soviet immigration policy.
But we're talking about individual liberty and all that it means for the cause of peace.
This is the first time in an American law, or in recent years, that we've insisted on some humanity and compassion in exchange for something that we give, trading privileges and credits.
And so on behalf of Congressman Vanik and myself,
all we ask of the Soviets is decent, humane treatment of people who desire to emigrate.
The new trade bill authorizes President Nixon to negotiate new world trade agreements. He wanted that power. But an amendment that would ban U.S. loans to the Soviet Union until Russia allows Jews and other minorities to immigrate freely from that country, the president didn't want that.
And there was a fight. There was a fight in the House and there was a fight in the Senate as to whether it was going to get passed. And we had people all over the country. When congressmen from the middle of nowhere start getting mail from people with a letterhead that says, you know, South Dakota Students for Soviet Jews, and they're getting letters from their Jewish Federation, and they're getting calls from people from all over the country, and they're getting calls from Scoop Jackson, signed onto my bill, or from Charles Vanik, signed onto my bill, all of a sudden it gets a certain momentum.
Vanik and I and 3 or 4 other members would walk around the House of Representatives with the actual official piece of paper, and the members would have to sign it, and we did it for months.
Public officials got excited by this. You know, we had a black coalition for Soviet Jewry, we had doctors for Soviet Jewry, we had lawyers for Soviet Jewry.
How many issues in this country could bring together Ted Kennedy and Jack Kemp?
The notion that I would be going from a progressive liberal Democrat's office to get a signature from a very conservative Republican, you know, this was something that we didn't do on other issues.
It's Vladimir Slepak speaking. Now the number of permissions for immigration decreases. We know soon will be new negotiations about Soviet-American trade. We need your support. We need your pressure on your Congress, on your government. Our fate is in your hands.
The administration lobbied heavily against the amendment, saying that it could harm the détente that now exists between the United States and the Soviet Union.
The right of the 100,000 people in the Soviet Union who have filed applications for visas to go to Israel.
This is really where all the years that we had put into grassroots organizing really paid off. We were able to call people and get tremendous pressure within 24 hours on congressional offices.
Beginning at noon today and continuing each day that the House is in session until the Mills-Vanik bill is passed, a number of my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, have agreed each day to make a 1-minute statement on the floor of the House outlining the plight of a specific person in the Soviet Union who has been denied
the right to emigrate and travel freely.
The administration is opposed, of course, to this. Nothing really seems to have changed.
You have every right to impose the condition that they grant this basic fundamental human right.
Let us not just talk, let us act.
Remember that you cannot get 76 senators
out of 100 and more than 280 representatives
to join in the Jackson Amendment as they have if the people of America were not behind this idea.
The Jackson-Vanik Amendment passed.
Мы не можем поверить,
происходит. Потому что нас 2 года и 3 месяца убеждали в том, что мы никогда не уедем из Советского Союза.
Для участия в завершающем этапе совещания прибыла делегация Советского Союза во главе с Леонидом Ильичем Брежневым.
For the first time in the history of the West, you had 35 nations, including the United States and Canada, entering into the Helsinki Accords.
There were 3 sections of the act, essentially. One dealing with security, one dealing with economic relations between countries, and the third dealing with human rights.
They didn't realize in signing on to a document that had human rights as one of its centerpieces that we could then use the human rights principles, i.e. the right to leave, the right to be reunited with your families, the right to speak. Andrei Sakharov was later to tell me that the Helsinki Final Act became, our human rights manifesto.
By far the biggest influence on me played Andrei Dmitrievich Sakharov, the chief scientist of the Soviet Union, who sacrificed all his unique positions in order to speak on behalf of human rights. And one of the most gratifying things in my career of a human rights activist was that I was a postman, like the one who was taking these letters from Sakharov, helping him to write them in English, making sure that through our secret channels they will get to the West.
The Helsinki Watch Committee made lists of all the violations of human rights that the Soviet government was committing. Sharansky sent me these by various means, and I passed them on to the Union of Councils, who published them.
Each time when there was trial against Jewish activists, he made it his rule to come to the court to attract the attention of the journalists from abroad and to draw more attention to the persecutions against Jews.
В открытом письме в Верховный Совет СССР Сахаров писал, что он считает свободу выбора страны проживания одним из важнейших прав.
Сахаров сказал, что когда человек знает, что он может уехать из страны, он никогда не будет рабом.
Знаете, когда дети начали расти, я понимаю, что это какой-то тупик для наших детей. Еще год отказа, еще год отказа. И каждый раз я молила Бога, Господи, только детей отправь из России, детей. Ну вот Бог услышал и разрешил им уехать.
Были такие обстоятельства, что расставались навсегда. Нам говорили, что вы никогда отсюда живыми не уедете. И поэтому, когда Дарина, наконец-то, после долгих наших настоятельных требований, получила разрешение, мы с ней расставались навсегда.
I'm afraid most of all that I will not see my parents, never.
But let's hope. And it's okay that Darina will escape from life here, from USSR.
Darina is my first child. I love her very much. And of course, it's a very hard time to separate with you. But at the same time, I feel a joy because we want her to be free.
At that very time, Vital got a permission to leave Moscow for Israel. She was told if she will not do it immediately, she will never again will get permission. But we just planned our chuppah. We were working so hard for this. And the 4th of July, we had our chuppah, our marriage. And on the 5th of July, Vital, my wife, left for Israel. We believed that very soon we'll be together. That I said to her, I think that maximum 6 months we'll be together. It happened so that we met 12 years later.
On April the 19th, the Soviet security police, the KGB, seized at Moscow airport part of a film that had been shot unofficially in the Soviet Union, but they got nothing of importance. The film we show tonight left Moscow on a different flight and was undetected.
Why are people now becoming so much more ready to demonstrate?
Because, you see, they're in a very desperate position. Because after you spend 2 or 3 years in refusal, losing all your human rights, you're in a very desperate position.
A television company got inspired to make a film about Sharansky. They took their equipment and took it apart into small pieces, and we gave a little bit at a time to tourists. It took about 3 months to get all their equipment in.
At least 100,000 Jews decided to immigrate and ask for invitations, but they're afraid to use them because of the persecutions and intimidations.
Do you ever regret your decision to take a stand against the Soviet government?
Oh, no, never regret. First of all, I want to say that not against the Soviet government, but for my right to immigrate. But I never regret it, though my life now is much more dramatic. But you see, now I live in peace with myself, in inner peace, I mean. And there is no constant irritation because of impossibility to say what you think and to behave in such a way as you do want. It's very important.
Do you feel that you will ever change your mind the other way?
No, never, never.
How long do you think you'll have to stay in the Soviet Union?
Who knows? I wait for visa for 3 years, and I hope to get it as soon as possible. My wife is waiting for me.
Though there were many people who were saying that it's very dangerous, we felt that's maybe the only way to succeed. My favorite proverb was, when you ride on the tiger, the most dangerous is to stop. It became the first TV interview shown in the West. It really bewildered KGB, and I think that was the moment when KGB decided to arrest me.
כשקיבלתי מברק שנתן נעצר, אז הייתי מאוד עצובה, ואח שלי מאוד עזר לי, אמר לי שצריכה להיות מוכנה למאבק ארוך.
Do you think this is the start of a campaign against the Jews in Russia?
Да, я думаю, что это начало просто уничтожения еврейского движения за выезд в Израиль.
פעם אחת נסענו לארצות הברית כדי לעורר דעת קהל. אנשים באו ונתנו כסף וזה, וקנינו כרטיסים.
We thought the next thing she would do was go around to the campuses and stress this business with anti-Semitism, and of course at the same time stress Sharansky. Yes, Avital will be the one going around and trying to...
ואנרגיה ורצון טוב ומסירות נפש, ממש. הרבה ארגונים, כמו 35 נשים, או Union of Councils. אנחנו בנינו על זה, וחוץ מזה שבנינו, בא משם הרבה יותר ממה שבנינו.
I don't think anybody understands. I don't think anybody's got an answer as to what the Russians have done and why they're doing it. I'm just concerned. I want them out of there. No deals, out. That's it. And I don't know how we're going to do it.
Before the trial, I have the right to look through all the documents which are used against me. There were 51 volumes, 300 pages in each. Suddenly I saw that they are quoting some film which appeared in the West after my arrest, I immediately demanded that they'll show me the film. They, of course, they didn't want, but I said, I'm sorry, I have the right to see all the documents which you're using against me. So in the end, they showed me this film. There you can see the demonstration in front of the Soviet embassy in London, and the one who is leading this demonstration is my wife. To see my wife after all these years as if she entered the prison. So the moment film was finished, I immediately demanded that they'll show it to me again. Colonel Volodin, who was the head of this interrogating team, became very irritated and started shouting on me. He said, you see, you really believe that these people will help you? You think that the help will come from them? Look who they are. They are a bunch of students and housewives. And we are KGB. What you're hoping for?
It is my great privilege to introduce Avital Sharansky, Mrs. Anatoly Sharansky, to you.
I not speak very well English, and if it's difficult for me, I ask from Gveret Dinis to help me, okay? I'm also very, very happy to be here today, to see everyone here. And I think it's must.
The strategy of KGB was very simple. They were explaining to me, look, there was no such a case in the history of Soviet Union that we officially accuse somebody in being spy and he will get out alive. If you want to go to Israel to your wife and you're young and you have a young wife, so you have long life ahead of you, you want to have your life, say publicly at the press conference that we are right and you're wrong.
The trial of Anatoly Sharansky was the trial of human rights in the Soviet Union.
We are both signatories of the third basket of the International Helsinki Accords, which gives the right of the United States.
We became the unofficial, self-appointed lawyers for the movement.
Did you remain in contact with Anatoly by writing and by telephone?
No, he's absolutely...
And we showed how they violated their legal system, not the Canadian legal system, not the Soviet legal system. And it was a brief of some 120 pages of legal argument, and then began the use of the legal brief as a basis for worldwide public advocacy. We had a document that was able to absolutely shame the Soviet Union.
Sharansky became the cover story in Time magazine, the lead story in the evening news. His picture was in every magazine and newspaper in the world. It made it impossible for the Soviets to kill him or disappear him.
Подпольное сионистское сборище в Москве. Интервью зарубежным корреспондентам дает Шаранской. Здесь, на площади Пушкина, говорит он, состоялась первая демонстрация евреев, но никто не был арестован. Изображал из себя борца за права человека, а на деле шпион, завербованный Центральным разведывательным управлением.
The allegation that Sharansky was a spy for the United States is patently false. The Soviets know it to be false.
The verdict was announced today, and as expected, Anatoly Sharansky, one of the more famous dissidents ever to be placed on trial in Russia, was found guilty of treason, of spying for the United States, and of anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda.
Anatoly Sharansky heard the sentence calmly. He is to spend 3 years in prison, 10 in a labor camp. There were shouts and applause from the hand-picked public allowed to watch what the Soviets call an open trial. Sharansky said the charges were absurd and that he was at peace. In his statement to the court, Sharansky conveyed a message to his wife, Avital. It was the age-old message of Jews in the diaspora next year in Jerusalem. From under the umbrellas, Jewish dissidents and Refusenik sang Hatikva, the Israeli anthem. ABC News, Moscow.
one of us have ever learned how to make a secret operation in the USSR under the big nose of the KGB. And it was very, very dangerous.
I began to thought about some kind of a framework which would enable us to create a kind of a root system, a net, so which we will be able to deliver Zionist and cultural and Jewish materials. I understood that the Hebrew studying is the best because it gives to people a feeling that they practically prepare themselves for Israel.
That's the way to enhance the Jewish feeling inside the souls of the great number of people. It's very difficult to suppress just because it's language, and it's very instrumental. We gathered in a secret place in Moscow, took the big map of the USSR, and thought which regions we could take on ourselves.
There were about 25 cities where we actually had organized groups. I was taking groups into the Caucasus Mountains. We were going up above 2,000 meters above sea level. And KGB usually didn't go higher than that. Every day you siege them 6-7 hours.
We taught our students all the rules, meaning when we are studying Hebrew and we are not doing anything illegal, we are not dealing here with some anti-Soviet plot, but if there is a knock on the door, don't rush to open. Let's first take away all the books. We always had a cup of tea or something on the table. You know, someone comes, we are drinking tea, not forbidden. Well, we were not professional Mossad agents. We were normal people. So there was a knock on the door, and this friend of mine was sure that it was her son who came back from the street, and definitely she opened the door. Instead of her son, there was a bunch of less nice men. And then they basically said in front of all the students, listen, we know this guy. If we catch you with this guy once again, please get the message now because you don't want to know what will happen next time.
There was a coup d'etat in Afghanistan today. A communist leader favorable to Moscow was deposed by another communist leader even more favorable to Moscow. And some of the thousands of Soviet troops who had been pouring into Afghanistan this week helped overthrow the government.
After the invasion of Afghanistan, there was a tremendous effort to suppress all Jewish activity in Russia. And you could do it many ways. If you were the Soviets, you could isolate Jews, prevent telephone calls from the West and tourists from the West. You could also arrest people.
Тысячи людей, которые ожидали разрешения на выезд, многие из них продали квартиры, многие из них продали свои имущества. И внезапно в один день был закрыт выезд людей. Ни на работе, негде было ни жить, ни кушать. Начались демонстрации, начались всякие действия наши по отношению к властям с требованием выпустить, с требованием что-то сделать. Меня посадили в административный арест, а потом прямо оттуда повезли в психиатрическую лечебницу. Когда в тюрьме хоть какие-то права есть, там нет никаких прав. Считается, что ты больной, что ты сумасшедший, и что никаких прав нет, никаких.
Putting people in prison created martyrs, but putting people in psychiatric facilities was an effective way of silencing them.
The dissidents were given these phony diagnoses like delusions about emigration, schizophrenic misunderstanding of the glorious Soviet political system, religious delusions which led them to think that there was some sort of persecution of religion in the Soviet Union, which of course there wasn't.
Once diagnosed and hospitalized, these people were often treated, in quotes, treated with medications. They were extremely sedating, or they were injections that were extremely painful, and they were designed to cause rather than cure mental distress.
Не только меня, многих привязывали к кровати веревками. Я пытался как-то контролировать себя, Но когда делают уколы, то человека сводит судорогой, так что голова поворачивается в одну сторону, руки в другую сторону. И это неимоверная боль.
It was a terrible perversion of medicine, of psychiatry. We tried to call attention to what was going on in the psychiatric hospitals. World public opinion ultimately was galvanized against these abuses.
And on one notable day in 1983, the official Soviet Psychiatric Association withdrew from the World Psychiatric Association because if it hadn't withdrawn, it would have been expelled.
In 3 or 4 months, there was a wave of arrests. And in each case, there was some nice reason for an arrest. In one case, illegal possession of weapons. In another case, attack on a policeman. In my case, I have to say a Kafkian phrase, the search started as usual, meaning that first they brought 2 huge boxes from the nearest supermarket and started packing all the books. In Hebrew, in English, books, tapes, everything. Alice in Wonderland went, and Tolstoy went, everything went. They did it to Hebrew teachers from time to time, just to clean the apartment. And at some stage, one of them turned to me with a matchbox and said, by the way, what's inside this matchbox? So I said, how should I know? I don't have any idea where you took the matchbox from. And the guy said, in your place, I wouldn't be that funny, because what we have inside that matchbox looks very much like drugs.
В квартиру, где собралось более 70 евреев слушать лекцию, ворвалось туда 8 человек в гражданской одежде и 1 в униформе, милиционер. И, как в плохом кино, они сообщили по рации, 84-й, 84-й вошли в квартиру. В итоге забрали всех людей в автобусы, которые были заранее согнаны, подготовлены внизу. И толпа была специальная, которая кричала «Жаль, что вас Гитлер не добил».
Мы написали плакат «Отпустите к нашему сыну в Израиль». И мы вышли с этим плакатом на балкон. Собирается толпа и смотрит на нас. Я вдруг почувствовал сильный ожог на голове. И посмотрел наверх с 9-го этажа, то есть этажом выше. Из чайника на нас лили кипяток. Тогда они топорами выбили дверь входную в квартиру. Потом мы видим, плечом они высадили дверь в комнату. И нас арестовали.
А меня они 5 месяцев без всяких контактов с внешним миром ломали в тюрьме. На мой суд пришли очень многие отказники, которые кричали мне «Шалом, Евгений» на входе в суд. Я уже использовал этот суд просто как трибуну и говорил о еврействе, что это не преступление, желание выехать в Израиль.
Самое главное, что очень злило наших оппонентов, что мы не признавали, мы ни в чем не виноваты. И мы ничего не скрываем. Мы боремся за наши права, национальные права. Это их просто убивало.
Весь Советский Союз был покрыт лагерями, сетью лагерей. Это такая, как действительно карта некоего архипелага островов. И островов этих были 1000. Человеческая жизнь на ГУЛАГе стоит очень дешево. Ну, тот, кто становится на этот путь, должен принимать во внимание все возможные опасности.
И привезли меня туда, в Сибирь, в место, где я должен был быть в ссылке. Это глухая деревня в Монголии, примерно 50 километров от того места, где родился Чингисхан известный.
Нас убивала эта ссылка и физически, и морально. Мы были в изоляции полной. Мое утро начиналось с того, что я подходила к календарю и зачеркивала день. Но я понимала, что я зачеркиваю не только день ссылки, но и день моей жизни. Я перечеркиваю, еще один день ушел из моей жизни.
И этот карцер, Владимирский карцер, должен вам сказать совершенно страшные вещи. Представьте себе вот такой пенал шириной, может быть, 1,5 метра. 1,5 метра. Вот вы туда входите, там ничего нет, абсолютно голые стены и страшный холод. А вас перед этим раздевают. Вам дают только такие бумазейные, такие очень, в общем, тонкие и холодные брюки и куртку, и это все. Холод такой, что это просто человек, можно сказать, просто это пытка.
Officials permitted to keep the prisoner in punishing cell no more than 15 days. Otherwise, it's believed that it's dangerous for his mental state, physical state, and so on. Altogether, he spent in punishing cell 405 days. So that is the way of trying to destroy your resistance. For a year, I couldn't send even one word to my mother in Moscow or to my wife in Jerusalem. I started hunger strike.
According to many medical professionals, the men cannot survive in the 4 months of hunger strike in such condition.
Он не виновен. Это знает уже весь мир. Он не виновен. Его пребывание в тюрьме ведет его к гибели.
His situation is very dangerous. He's been on hunger strike for 72 days. No one in his family, no one in the world has heard from him in a year's time. And we don't know what his condition is.
The wife of jailed Soviet Jewish dissident Anatoly Sharansky talked to reporters outside the Soviet embassy.
How can we believe to Mr. Gorbachev and he's going next week to talk about world peace when the people like Anatoly, they're still in prison?
President Reagan always felt that he should talk with the Soviets. He was a realist, and he wanted to talk frankly. It's hard to imagine a genuinely decent relationship between our countries as long as you treat people the way you do. President Reagan decided to make human rights the main issue that he talked about. And you could see when the two men came out of that meeting, this bouncy camaraderie wasn't there. It was pretty stiff.
The first sign that Moscow under Gorbachev was prepared to make concessions over dissidents came in February this year, when Anatoly Sharansky, the Jewish human rights campaigner who'd spent 9 years in jail and labor camps, was released in an exchange of prisoners at the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin.
I saw this moment so many times in prison, in dreams. I remembered how 12 years ago I said, you can be sure, the latest, in 6 months it will be together. So I told her in Hebrew, I'm sorry, I'm late.
Hello, Mr. President. Hello. I just want to say thank you. Mr. President, if you can hear the voice of happiness here in Israel, and all my nation, all my people here, they are very happy, and we believe that it's only beginning for exodus for our people from Russia.
I'm starting my hunger strike today. For 17 days, 17 days will mark 17 years that my father and my mother are waiting to be free.
There are at least 600,000 Soviet citizens who want to leave the Soviet Union. Kremlin policy is to ignore their right to immigrate. And one man, Vladimir Slepak, has for 17 years fought against that policy.
I want Secretary Schultz to take a message to the Soviets that Vladimir Slepak served his term for justice, for humanity, for just being a person with his own children, with his own grandchildren that he never met.
To us, I would now like to start the Seder with the traditional blessing over the wine.
We had a Seder in our ambassador's residence. And I remember the next day I met with the Secretary General of the Communist Party, Mikhail Gorbachev. And I didn't realize it, but this Seder was widely publicized, and he knew all about it. And he said to me, how come you come here and you're always meeting with the lousy Jews? Why don't you meet with other people? We have some good Jews. I said, you don't like them? I have a great big airplane on the tarmac, and there isn't a person in my party that won't give up his or her seat, and you just put them on that airplane and we'll take them off your hands.
By signing the Helsinki Accords, the Soviet Union obligated itself to allow all Soviet citizens to freely practice their religion and to preserve their cultural heritage. It also obligated itself to allow those who so choose to emigrate. But 12 long years after Helsinki, neither of these provisions of Helsinki have been upheld by the Soviets, and tens of thousands of Soviet Jews are denied the right to leave. We hear much these days about glasnost, to which we say, open the gates, let Soviet Jews go.
Он меня вводит в кабинет, закрывает на ключ, мы с ним вдвоем, и он меня спрашивает, скажи, пожалуйста, президент Рейган твой друг? Я говорю, если он считает, что он мой друг, я, конечно, его друг. И он мне показывает письмо, подписанное президентом Рейганом, не больше и не меньше, который требует, чтобы меня освободили. Президент, не ему, конечно, письмо, а письмо Горбачеву.
Нет, я не хотел, чтобы они уезжали. Я не буду скрывать, я не хотел. Это много талантливых людей. Много очень людей, хороших людей. У меня друзей много были и есть они. Я знаю многих из них. С некоторыми учился еще в университете. Так что это понимание тут было. А что же, если есть высшая ценность? Человек должен быть свободен.
Я был 5 лет ссылки плюс 4,5 года уже арест тюремно-лагерный. Итого 9,5 лет. На вокзале в Москве, куда я приехал из тюрьмы, прямо в куртке заключенного, меня встречали товарищи, меня посадили на плечи и таким образом пронесли по платформе вокзала, и мы пели песни. Было ощущение, что мы на пороге каких-то серьезных перемен, и что мы можем получить вот скоро разрешение.
Когда мы были в ссылке, среди этого холода, я говорила, Господи, я хочу детей увидеть, ну, хотя бы 1 час. На 1 час. И вернуться.
Of course, it could be better to meet outside. As we've said for 1,000 or so years, next year in Jerusalem.
Maybe this. Maybe this.
Maybe this. Maybe this.
Делегации конгрессменов встречались с Горбачевым. Говорит, ну как же так, права человека и прочие такие высокие материи. Вот Слепак, 17 лет в отказе. А Слепак никогда не уедет, и не надо вообще о нем говорить.
I'm in a complete fog right now. It's impossible to believe we didn't see each other for 10 years.
Unbelievable to be here, to be free. И на утро мы вылетели самолетом, и когда мы пересекли морскую границу Израиля, нам сказали, что вот мы уже над территориальными водами Израиля.
We came through. Congratulations from the crew. Thank you very much. I am not an outstanding person. I am a simple Jew. I think many of you, many of other Jews, being in my situation, could do the same.
Я помню первый вечер в Иерусалиме. Я вышел на балкон, и передо мной был старый город Иерусалима. И звонили колокола в христианских церквях, и поднималось солнце. Вот ради этого одного мгновения стоит жить. Было такое чувство, я не знаю, чувство полного счастья.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go.
There were over 250,000 people bussed in from all over the nation, as far as you can see, from every state, from every city.
Maybe the march in '87 was the one where all these different pieces came together. We created something very unique. We were able to utilize all these resources to be a presence in Washington, D.C.
How many times from the very beginning of our struggle we heard that it is impossible to open the gates of the Soviet Union. And we didn't listen to these voices. And that's why I and other prisoners of Zion today are free, today are here. History will judge if we understand that our struggle doesn't finish today, that our freedom and freedom of our brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union is inseparable, that every day which we are not struggling for their freedom is lost for our freedom too.
And we knew we won, because all of a sudden the media went nuts, and Gorbachev saw the march, and he understood exactly what kind of political problems were faced here. Just on that level, to resolve to have a relationship on other levels with the American president and the Congress. After that march, where 127,000 people were given visas out of the Soviet Union within the next 2 months, as promised in secret conversations that went on as a result of all of this. And all the rest is history.
In 1989, everything ended. I mean, prisoners were released, the gates were open, and it was as if the nightmare had never been. And I can think of very few examples in history of something happening so quickly.
We really didn't think the Soviet Union would fall because
Remember who we were faced on a day-to-day basis with our noses against the grindstone. We were seeing KGB and people arrested and people grabbed, you know, and this implacable enemy.
And when it actually collapsed, I hardly believed it. I couldn't believe it, really.
The notion that a handful of students could change the course of Jewish history, transform the American Jewish agenda, impose a human rights agenda on American foreign policy. All of this was just a fantasy. And it's only the naivete of young people that can change history.
Я думаю, что это люди, которые не напрасно жили, и они внесли свой вклад в формирование вот того, что в обществе сформировались понимание необходимости демократических перемен.
The hundreds of thousands of Jews who have emigrated since then, over 1 million by now, owe it to this handful of heroes who risked it all. They stand on the shoulders of these Refuseniks. These are the people who blazed the trail.
The Refuseniks really opened the gates to freedom for the many thousands of Jews that followed them. It was like living through this modern-day exodus where Jews came out from darkness to light.
It's important to realize any Passover that when we're celebrating the Exodus of 3,000 years ago, every single year, in every Jewish home, that in our lifetime, there was another Exodus, at least as important, where 1.5 million Jews and their children and their grandchildren will live in freedom.
Thank you.